listening live to the To Extreme Horror Show. Tonight's movie, Fright Night from 1985. I'm Rob, your host, and my guest tonight, as usual, is the real Dr. V, Dr. Venkman himself. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, you sound really pumped up. I'm glad to cover this movie with you. This is an underrated gem from the mid 80s. I believe you've seen it, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's been a while since I watched it, but I pretty much remember pretty much the story.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to mention about Fright Night is I'm going to tell a little story about actually physically going to see the movie with E back in the day when we were kids. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the film and some themes that are about it if anybody watches it. On the surface, Fright Night is one of those movies that it's typical 80s fare. It's a movie that I've described as good with some great scenes in there. I think the general theme of this is, whether it's intentional or not, is it's like a lot of Dracula movies. One way you can look at it is a sexual awakening, and the reason why I see that is because the teenagers in here you don't hate, but they're extremely plain Jane, and we'll talk about those with some scenes. As far as the movie Fright Night goes, this came out in the summer of '85. He was living out of town, away from the Pine Hills Palace, away from where we're broadcasting now, live in the studios. Went to see him. I used to spend the weekend with him, and we used to go to a small movie theater and catch movies. And so one of the movies, right next to the Goldmine Arcade, where he would kill everybody in Karate Champ, he would. We went to go see this movie, and it was rated R, I believe. This is the only movie that I've ever been that actually ushers refused to let people in on, and I'm shocked. It was absolutely baffling that they wouldn't allow that to happen. And this is a time when you go buy a ticket to see a movie, maybe you'd catch a second one, or you'd buy it for the movie. Nobody cared. Nobody said anything. It was just absolutely stunning that that happened. And I always remember that because this is the last movie I was going to see with E before he moved out of state for a while. Eric's joining us in channel. Good evening, Eric. Eric says the cast of Fright Night were guests at the Louisville Comic Convention this weekend. Oh, and you met Chris Sarandon and William Ragsdale. That's pretty interesting. That's cool. Oh,
Oh,
your friend did.
awesome.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, this Eric, we were just saying, it's a little bit of a gem. It's about sexual awakening, and I think there's some positive pre-PC life lessons that males can learn from this movie. And so, Doctor, I just want to bring up the fact that while specifically not just in Chuck Norris movies, but in other movies we covered, there's been a lot in the 80s sightings of the members only jacket, which goes into our fashion files. And here, I have to say, this guy is not dressed queer or funny or swishy or whatever term you want to use, asexual, girly. He's dressed very masculine, but he's a pretty guy, and he does a great job of just looking seductive without it being overpowering. In all the scenes that he's in, he's a man. Whereas, our lead guy, Charlie and all that, he's a boy, and he's got a girlfriend named Amy, who's Al Bundy's neighbor before all this happened. Amy's her name in here, and Amanda Burst plays the character, and she's, to be blunt, is very plain Jane. I think she's made to look this way. So again, don't know if it's intentional. I think super hot people from teenagers would have distracted you from it. But this movie overall, I think my initial thoughts are it's a good movie. It's done great. There's some outstanding things about it, and a lot of it actually has some of the adult themes to it that make it kind of funny because nobody cares about the teenagers, but you don't hate them. They're just there as a vehicle for the adult stuff going in it. So I actually think this is an adult film, not a kid's film. So for me, I'm going to talk about a couple scenes that happened in the movie that kind of illustrate this point. So for you, Doctor, what were some of the initial things you remember that you liked about this movie?
Well, this movie, compare it when I watched it like in the late '90s. So like when I saw this movie, it had the feel of like, if you watch a B movie like Roger Corman. I mean, they weren't meant to be taken like like serious. Because this movie, you watch the plot of this, there was humor in it, mixed well with kind of suspense and kind of terror, you know.
I agree.
Um, and that's what is okay if it felt like a Roger Corman because Roger Corman still had some good movies.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't all hokey stuff like everybody thinks it is. Um, but no, but I liked it. I liked the plot of it. Here's a kid. He he comes across a real life vampire, and he's trying to convince his buddy, and then his buddy kind of goes like missing, you know, and
Hmm.
like it's and you know and it's also if you're a big like a vampire fan, like Charlie Brewster, he's watching this show. It's supposed to be like Vincent Price, Price, almost like that,
It is
It's kind of, yeah,
that's
yeah,
where
yeah,
Peter Vincent got his name, Peter Cushing and Vincent
yeah,
Price.
yeah. So he's watching this guy, this original vampire hunter, and he's always watching like this guy's Peter Vincent, who he's hosting like show, like we have Sven Gully, who hosts like every Sunday nights or whatever it's nights it on now.
Hmm.
But you'd watch it, and then he'd host it, and then he'd air the horror movies. And so he got like he's like, oh great, this guy's awesome. Is like this is one of the things you idolize, and like this takes place in the '80s, so it kind of makes sense because that's what you do. You um I want to be offended, but or if anybody, but he wasn't there. Charlie was a nerd. Um, and that's, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And it's actually it helps out the story because like what do nerds do? We read comic books. We know more things, stories. How to take down vampires, how to take down the creature from the Black Lagoon. We know it, It's like it's so when he comes across it's this guy named Jerry, it's like he's like this guy is like, dude, he's like exhibiting the same thing as like a vampire. He's like, no, it can't be real. But then his friend like ends up getting like turned into a vampire, and he's like, oh crap, it's real. And it's like it's
Hmm.
then his the scene that really kept it really, to this day I always remember that scene in the club where
Yeah,
he's
I think that honestly, for the story part of it, is like one of the key. It's one of the key scenes too, but that's towards the end. So let's take what you said and let's actually start at the beginning here because rewatching it this weekend, there's a few things that popped out to me that I didn't take as much attention to when I was younger watching it, and it relates all to the club scene actually. If you think of that as the apex of the adult themes, so to
yes.
your point, I'm just gonna say this right off the bat: single mom. Don't know if how that's relevant, but I'm going to tell you how it's relevant. It just you seem to see that a lot now. But of course, absentee father. Most of the '80s fathers were, for the most part, not your ward cleavers. They were just the guy reading the newspaper in a room, and you only got a shot of him. So back then, male role models were being made fun of in movies. And here, the reason why it's important is because, to your point, this guy is, it starts off with him making out with his girlfriend. So Charlie's there, upstairs in his room. They're watching a horror show, and he's with his girlfriend Amy. They're making out, and the fact that they're like not super hot people and they're not ugly, they seem like normal teenagers the way they look. They seem like one's not hotter than the other. They seem like a couple that is realistic together. They're making out, and she's, you go at the pace of the woman when it comes to seduction. Some people would say she's ready to do it, and he's ready to do it too. But this is the problem that I have is with the movies. One, this guy, you could almost say he's acting like he's just not sexually aware or cognizant at this age where he's like 15, 16. Actually, I think he's more like 16, 17 because he's in trig class in high school. But he gets distracted, to your point, by the neighbors moving in. And one of the things that's really good about this film is the way it's shot. There's not these wide shots like Carpenter would have, or there's a lot of close-ups, but a lot of zoom-ins where you can really get a good perspective of what's going on. So I think the editing is sharp because he sees the coffin going in, and then he sees the guy, and he sees like a hot chick going into the neighbor's place. And then, of course, she gets all upset, Amy does, because she wants to do it, and he's basically not paying attention to her. So she gets all like in a tizzy and leaves and all that too, and he's all frustrated, and of course that's when we find out that the mom is single. So to your point, the setup is cool without not a lot of people on screen. I don't know if it was shot like in the backlot of Universal or wherever, but that's what it looks like. He has to, in the '80s, go, God, there's a vampire in the real world, and that's a nice little hook. How would you handle it? How would you deal with it? And not in the Vampire Diaries way, where it's an excuse to be a vehicle for like 12, 14-year-old girl romance type things. This is like the high school boy version of it, turning into a man. So he gets distracted when he meets his girl in the what would you call it, the soda shop back in the day, a little retro shop, because he sees on the news another body's been found, and he's ignoring her, and she's apologizing. So she wants it. She wants it bad. She wants him to make her a woman, and he's not doing it. He's not even cognizant or aware in the moment that that's what she wants. That's what a dope this guy is. So this guy's
Was it
almost hateable early on, I think.
wasn't he more into the show than her?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. He was into the TV show, so you're like, uh, okay. I mean, and we all know
I'm trying.
back, when we're
Yeah,
younger, those first time jitters, how they are. But my God, you got a woman upstairs and she's wanting you
he's like
twice. Come on.
I can't record this. I gotta need to watch it live.
Yeah. Let's take a moment to recognize Jay being in here as he popped in. As always, if we're set up for it, which in this case we are, I like to do that, what I like to call that three bang salute, which is numpad 6. So hold that thought.
Diamond Cutter! Bang! When it's all said and done, there can be only one. Bang!
The Diamond Cutter, for the wrestling fans among us listening to the show, it would be a very appropriate comment about this movie because ultimately that's what his girlfriend Amy wants. She wants her boyfriend Charlie to give her the Charlie Cutter and go bang. You know what I'm saying? So after rejecting her twice, which is one way you could look at it from the female perspective, you could say she's a strong woman. She knows what she wants. She's not afraid to let him know. She's actually not even doing the dopey teenage girl thing and going, oh God, this guy, I'm not doing any of that. She's like, hey, look, I'm sorry. I apologize. Maybe I was forcing myself on you, kind of. But she throws the milkshake in him. And then this is where we meet his dopey super nerd. If you think this guy's nerd, his buddy is a super nerd, Ed, the one that has this really weird voice and bad haircut. I mean, this guy's just a complete dope.
He looks like he stepped out of like a Peter Pan or Captain Hook show. Just the way he looks.
Yeah, he doesn't look. He looks like his practical effects. He doesn't look like a real human being.
No, no, he didn't need no much makeup at all. Just give him some fangs, you're good.
Oh, Dalton popped in. Good evening, sir. Dalton says at the moment when they fail to listen to the occult nerd. Yeah, because whenever you have an occult nerd, they're always right. I mean, that's how little they're used in movies, unless it's like a group of chicks or something like with, a coven or something. But yeah, so what's neat about this movie is early on, we know what the setup is. They don't drag it out. You get to where the mother says, hey, I'd like you to meet your neighbor. And then Charlie freaks out because he turns around and the most unvampire-y name of all time, Jerry. Okay, so I don't know, but there was a thing back in the day where if you had a man's name or a boy's name, a male's name, whenever you added a Y into it, it made it sound like you're a kid. So if your name was Jonathan, nobody would call you that because you'd get beat up. It's too proper, so it would be John. But if you're a kid, you'd be called Johnny. Or like if your name was, Robert, people would call you Rob. They wouldn't call you Robbie. You see what I'm saying? So Jerry, I mean
Hmm.
Gerald just sounds a little bit more snooty. So I don't know where they're going with. Where they were trying to go nondescript because they did, but there's a scene where early on he had seen Jerry with a woman upstairs, and it's kind of instead of the sexy sax that we like to talk about in '80s movies, this is the sexy guitar, which became a thing in the mid to late '80s, most notably on the Werewolf TV show that was on Fox for only one season. That had, of course, the rifleman in it, Chuck Connors, but that's another conversation. So they go to meet, and this is a great scene because this is the adult themes. You've got a single mom who's not ugly. She's dressed decent. She doesn't seem like she's too thirsty or too desperate, but she seems proper. He'd come over. She invited him in, and you don't know it, and that's kind of the joke. They're still using the old vampire conventions, and then we're figuring out early on not only the setup but what the rules of the game are. So he's like, "Hi, Charlie," and he goes to shake his hand, and he's just dressed up really impeccably and all that, and he just makes a couple comments while he's talking, like, "Well, now that I'm invited, I can come over anytime I want. Probably see a lot of you with your mom's permission, of course," and he makes light of it. And this is just a really nice exchange because you get to see Charlie kind of freak out. And it's true. We should not believe kids in movies, in my opinion, for the most part. And that's where it's neat. You see this from a kid's perspective going, what would I do in this situation? Because he goes to the police. All this stuff happens. Nothing really comes of it. So you're only about a third of the movie in when you realize, okay, he's exhausted of all his possibilities except for going the nerd route, which is go get Peter Vincent, played by Roddy McDowall, off the TV, slip him a few bucks, and let's see if he can go over there and prove that he's a vampire, which of course he goes to do. And this is where we get into the second act. Yeah, so
I just
Jay's saying I hate getting called Johnny. Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. Or Vince.
I just
Vincent's better than Vinny.
I just want to quickly bring up for those who don't know who this guy playing Jerry is, Chris Sarandon, Prince Humperdinck, man, Princess Bride. He's also in Child's Play, played Mike.
You know why he
Dog.
was in Child's Play? Because he knew the writer and he didn't want to do this movie, he didn't want to do a horror movie. But the writer of this did the first Child's Play. He also did a movie that was one of E's more talked about underrated gems of the 80s called Cloak and Dagger. So these guys had a really good connection and lifelong friendship. And I'm not sure if they had a relationship going into The Princess Bride, but absolutely. He might have been in Havana too later on with Robert Redford. I'm not sure, but he's in a few
And
things.
I thought it was funny. I just saw he was in another thing. He was in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode, and he played Count Dracula. Did the voice of it. That was funny. That was 2017.
Yeah, so he drags Peter Vincent in, and Peter Vincent's getting the eviction notice. He's a has-been, never was kind of older dude. And when I saw this, I knew who Roddy McDowall was already from a bunch of older movies that he was in, Planet of the Apes and whatnot. And I just thought, wow, he's really old in here. And I don't remember how old he was in real life or how much they doctored his hair up to make him look old. But you're like, Jesus, he's really nailing the part. And he's almost overdoing it. I mean, he's really dancing with that line that Shatner would obliterate, let's say. But this scene is also kind of cool in the second act where they go over to the vampire's house and they're all kind of like going through stuff. And some people say there's like this gay overtone between Jerry and his Renfield type dude who's just kind of an ass clown looking guy. He looks like an adult Brewster, I guess. I don't know, or Ed. But they go through the whole scenes. He drinks the holy water. Nothing happens. They get the cross out, and he almost backs away. Nothing happens. That's kind of a neat scene. But right when they're finishing up talking as adults, not listening to the kids at all, Peter Vincent drops his cigarette case that it's got some glass in there or whatever, and he goes to pick it up, and there's a neat little shot of him where he doesn't see Jerry's reflection in the mirror, but everybody else's, and he double checks himself. And then when they're going to leave, they shake hands, and everything is done very properly. The etiquette in here is fantastic. It's not stuffy British type. It's just legitimate, good handshakes. It's like, is everything okay? And it's like, yeah, yeah. And it's like, are you sure? And it's like, yeah. And when they go to leave, Jerry's not 100% sure about it, but then he steps on a piece of glass, and then it's on. It's just these exchanges really, I think, make the movie. There was one even earlier where he'd went to visit Charlie upstairs in his bedroom to call him out, and he said, "Look, Charlie, I'm giving you something I never had, a chance." And that's a really neat line because it means that despite him being a vampire, whether he's super strong or super whatever, you don't know his background, but it hints at something, of a history that's been around for a while. And that I just like the way that feels when he presents it to Charlie, where he actually shows, and I'm not trying not to sound cheesy here, a little bit of humanity. He's actually showing some genuine concern, whereas like with elves in The Hobbit or other characters that have seemed to have been around for hundreds of years, they always talk about how they've been around so long they're desensitized and cannot fully comprehend the human scale anymore, and you get a sense that he still can, which I thought was a nice little touch. So yeah, up to this point here, not a lot of action has happened, and we're getting up to a really really big scene going on here too. So up to this point, what are you thinking about the movie?
Well, I'm really enjoying it. I also love the trivia behind everything, how they did stuff. Because I'm the person that watches the movie, and then if they have commentary, I'll usually listen to it, or if they actually have like not just audio, but like actual like behind the scenes stuff, how they're filming it.
Mm-hmm.
This, like you said, like how they did the close ups and then did everything like this. It's like they have the bat, the giant like man bat thing
Mm-hmm.
creature. It was just a puppet. It was kind of cool. Like I don't know if you knew this, but when the for Ed and Jerry, whenever they had their eyes would glitter yellow,
Mm-hmm.
how they well the context they had, they actually were especially made that way. They actually had gold glitter embedded in them.
Yes.
So I thought that was pretty cool how they did that, because everything was all practical effects and there was no CG. And I think I still think that practical effects are better than CG.
I agree with you, and that the practical effects here, they couldn't CGI over stuff and anything. So like the pencil in the guy's hand probably was like a spring or some
Yep.
sort of glue
Yep.
thing or
hmm
whatever. But yeah, this movie's
The
all
dog,
practical.
the dog, and everything like that too was all done. Uh, I'll ask you this though: you're watching last night, the club scene. Did you notice that Jerry's shoulder shined a little bit, it reflected?
Not off the top of my head, what do you mean?
Yeah. If you can slowly moving towards Amy, in a brief moment, you see his shoulder can be reflected in one of the mirrors.
Oh no. Well, let's talk about that scene actually, because up to this point they all know that he's a real vampire. So you've got the
Yeah.
boyfriend, the girlfriend, the nerdy friend. You know, they all know, and of course Peter Vincent. They all know that Jerry's a vampire. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? And they're not all exactly on the same page. So basically, Jerry's like, okay, I'm gonna go after him. You know. Not directly, but he's going to go after the weak link, which is his buddy. So he's chasing after them all, and they kind of end up in this club publicly. And this is a really key scene, not because he's gonna change his friend or whatever like that. It's really about seducing his girlfriend. Because how do you get back at a man? You could take away his belongings. You know, you could do this, you can do that. You have your stations in life. Basically, just steal his woman. And the bottom line is, like we mentioned at the beginning, she was wanting Charlie to make her a woman, and she was at that age, and she didn't go into it feeling forced. She didn't have to sign, a consent waiver like somebody probably would make a song about these days. It was just the natural course of nature, and here he is. Maybe not by having a father or just being a nerd, not knowing what to do, or just nervous about it. He seemed like he wasn't interested at all. She's looking for it. So Jerry gives her what she wants, and basically he kind of glams her, for lack of a better word, and you start having this '80s music, and it's at night where you have the blue light, and of course tons of fog machines because that's what you need, not just in wrestling but in '80s movies. And they're in this club, and he takes her out on the dance floor, and he starts dancing and kind of getting all erotic. No twerking, none of that stupid club stuff, but just kind of what was apropos at the time. So yeah, to your point, this club scene I think is very important because this is where he seduces her emotionally before doing it physically when he takes her back to his house. So what else did you notice about the club scene?
Well, he was also like, hypnotizing her too when she looked in his eyes, and she was kind of glancing his gaze as I thought it was cool because he's trying to get to her, and well, it's a crowd, and everybody's like freaking dancing, horribly dancing. He's trying to get to her, and like, hey, that's my, and he's like, dude, that's my girlfriend. And he's like, what? 'Cause they basically him and his buddy got kicked out because they're underage. They weren't supposed to be in that club.
Hmm.
And then Jerry takes a whole advantage of that, and says no, all he just kind of slips away. Um, I say, like you said, this is where you get to see him like being like a freaking predator, man.
Yes.
This is like you just look at his face. He's like, he's not even flinched by it. He's just like whatever. You see, Leighton I'm not sure. I can't remember if he grinned or not, but this would be the spot in the movie if he do want to do that, he would grin, just
Well,
smirk a little bit.
well, I think he kind of gets a little pissed at the end there because he ends up whacking one of the security guards as they all go to leave and stuff. But
Yeah,
up for
yeah.
the most part in this movie, he's acting like there was an old expression when he and I talked about doing the reviews of the James Bond films. We talked about the Sean Connery. I'd mentioned Sean Connery's like he's like a uncoordinated panther, and in a way, he's kind of like an animal. And I'm not talking about the names of the girls that he was slept with and the way the movie was, but just him as a character. He was a bodybuilder in real life, so he seemed kind of like this big brutish masculine kind of guy that toned down to get refined, which a lot of people like as Bond. People don't like a pretty Bond that you try to make tough because that seems fake, and no guy wants a fake tough guy. They want a tough guy that might learn how to be sophisticated. And I think that's where some people liked Craig initially because he had a little bit of that, where as I like the proper part of Pierce Brosnan. He's just a little too pretty and not the old school Sean Connery type. So in here, he obviously he's a vampire. He's got all this stuff, but he tries to be a refined gentleman most of the time. And even when he goes to turn his friend in the alleyway, he's like, "Look, I promise nobody's going to beat up on you again." Just the way he talks to him, he doesn't talk down to him, and he doesn't. Even though he's manipulating him in a sense, he's basically giving him a choice. He says, "I'm giving you a choice. Take my hand." And he says, "Take my hand," and you don't think that he's glamming him. But you're right. There's a scene in there where he's looking at her and he's just smiling, and it doesn't look like his eyes are on fire, like I'm hypnotizing you or sleep, like Bela Lugosi or anything.
Yeah.
He does it the way a man would be. He recognizes a woman's interested in him. He's interested in her, and he just kind of cuts through all the crap. And that's the great thing about being mature and being older is that when you recognize the situations, you can deal with it. There's none of this, oh, I don't know if I should, or I get distracted by watching other people or the TV or anything else like that. He's like, I ain't got time for this, Charlie. I'm taking your girl, and he didn't feel bad about it at all. And frankly, at this point, I'm going, yep. I don't feel bad about it at all. And this is about the only negative thing I could say is that this movie's more enjoyable from the adult point of view. Up to this point, I'm really not caring too much about what happens with Charlie or even Amy at this point. I'm not overly emotionally invested in them. I think it really kind of skews even more towards just the Peter Vincent part, and that would be the only complaint I would have. Yeah, as we talk about the end of the movie, what are you thinking?
Just the whole thing, like when you have the guys playing Peter Vincent going after him, it was pretty cool. Um, I mean, just the whole overall the movie, dude. Like they're fighting a vampire. Like these guys, they only know what they know from like a comic book. His best friend, he has already turned into a vampire, so he has to fight. He has to fight against his friend. That's this is like this kid man. Like if he's not traumatized after the end of this in this movie, I I don't know what the heck they say about it. Like they do manage to win. It gets his girlfriend because she's only half a vampire. He's able to save her by killing Jerry. She reverts.
Right, right.
But still, man, like ah, how messed up is that? It's like, how do you explain that to the cops? Well, so and so was a vampire. And I had to kill my best friend.
Well, you
You know,
don't. You just go back to working on your trig and go sex up your girlfriend now that it's over because yeah, they end up going back to Jerry's house, and there's of course the big scene, and I can't help but notice whether it was intentional or not, or maybe we're just so familiar with vampire lore these days in general, or the way they are in movies, is that there's a lot of parallels between this and one of the movies that we covered recently around Halloween, the original Dracula from the Hammer horror films. There's this neat little scene where Jerry comes down when they all come into the house, and it's going to be the final battle, and he goes, "Welcome to Fright Night," and he used to say that all the time. He used to do a real good job at
yeah,
it. But the window behind him, you're like, okay, it's going to be a sunlight thingy, which
yep,
it kind of looks like
dude.
the floor, which has a bunch of occult symbols on there. I couldn't make them out if they were Latin or what. In the original Hammer film of Dracula, that Christopher Lee dies on at the end. And so, maybe there's some homages paid to some of these old horror films, but it's still done well. And some of the practical effects are pretty good. Like I say, I don't think it's too gory. But at this point, Jerry had seduced his girlfriend Amy, and there's a little bit of blood trickling down her back, and it's more of like this erotic type of thing rather than a
Hmm.
wuss ass kind of thing or a schlocky teenager type thing. It does have an adult feel. In the 80s, you had some shows that were starting to turn into this a little bit. And Forever Night was one that came out a little bit later, and a few things on Fox. They were trying to do some things, and this movie predated by a few years, but it's just kind of neat. It's kind of sexy in its own way. But yeah, of course, they find out, hey, if we kill the leader, then we can save her. And they end up, through their final fight, doing that. And then they end up back where they started, come full
It
circle up in the
it was
room,
cool.
making out. Hmm?
It was cool how they defeated him. Like they had Vincent go after him, try to stake him in the heart, but he misses. So while he's all so the stake ends up breaking into two, and because Jerry was in his coffin this time, you know. And then like so at the meantime while this is going on, you see Brewster going around. He's smashing the windows, basement windows, to let the sunlight in,
Yep.
and basically Jerry just bursts into flames and in dust. Like
Yep.
he said, and then immediately they just go back, like they go in his bed, they're he's staring at his window. He's staring at the house next door. Now it's vacant. He sees a pair of red eyes glow at him. Then he's like shrugs it off. And he's like, "I'm getting laid. I don't care."
And that's exactly what it would be like. But see, that's the important thing about certain universal life lessons is that no matter what time of the year it is or how old you are, key things about being a man is, and it's nature. It's not my rules. It's nature's rules. When a
And
member
yeah,
of the opposite sex is interested in you, you have to recognize and act appropriately at the right time. And if you don't, bad things happen. So you can say this is an allegory of going through adolescence and not having a father at home. And I'm saying that half tongue in cheek, but that's what it almost seems like. But the one thing I
it's
did want to point out too is that despite some of the goofy stuff, like Jerry eating fruit after every time he kills somebody, he's like chomping on an apple or a banana or something. And bats are mostly fruit eaters anyway, so that's like an inside joke.
yeah.
Despite some humor like that you can get or not get. It's important because he obviously has changed at the end. They show him on the bed with his girlfriend, and they're making out, and they're getting ready to do it, and it sets it up for a sequel. But the ending, this movie, we're not going to talk about the sequels or the reboots or any of that. We may do that on
No,
another
no.
stream. But This movie has a kind of slow, deliberate, trance-like quality to it. The music, I think, is very good. It adds to it.
Oh
It's very
yes. Oh man.
atmospheric. Dalton will hate to hear this, of course, but as we did our top 10 of the 1990s, it turned out that Eyes Wide Shut was my favorite, or I think the best movie of the 1990s, and it's relative. There's a lot I didn't see, but out of the ones we didn't talk about. And one thing that everyone yelled at me about was that it's dumb and it's slow and everything else. I'm like, that's the point. That was deliberate. It's to make you think about the doctor that Tom Cruise played walking through like a dream and a nightmare, that was his self-conscious trying to figure out what's going on. And at the end of that movie, the real life lesson there that his wife basically says is, hey, we just need to go home and get busy. This movie is kind of similar in the sense that it's kind of got not a lot of extra people on it. There's a lot of close-ups. Everything's shot like in a single room. So you get this kind of feeling of isolation while you're watching it, and then the music's kind of slow, except for the sexy scene that you had talked about earlier that I think is really important, the disco scene, if you will, the dance club scene. And it really is basically, yeah, you got to take care of business. I mean, you just have to. So,
And
yeah.
and how's it end? Oh, you're so cool, Brewster.
That's what his nerdy friend says, and supposedly he's set up for it. So yeah. Um, let's see. Hey Dalton, Eric's saying a child, did you know Amanda Pierce is on All My Children in the early '80s? Man, I did not know that. And there was a
Soap
soap called
knowledge.
Soap. There's another one too. Yeah, I'm just double checking some of the comments that we've got on here. Now that's pretty much it. Any final thoughts you have, Doctor?
Say it. Like I said, anyway, we review. If you guys have never watched this, go back and watch it. And even if you have, if you just pick it up, man, you can usually find it on iTunes or Amazon or even on Netflix sometimes or Vudu or YouTube. Doesn't make a difference if you have a VHS, DVD. Uh, what was the other? The Laserdisc. You still got that. Watch it,
Betamax, Skinamax, to the max, to the extreme.
dude. Sit back, pop it in, watch it. It's a great movie. It's a
Uh,
vampires movie. I love vampire movies. I mean, well, I can't wait till we talk about the reboot or even the sequel to this, man. I always loved about this. It was a golden little gem. It's not really as big as all the other stuff, but I mean, it still has a following. You
and,
know,
and to be honest, we hadn't really actually talked about this movie. It was on our long list of movies to maybe do during the Halloween season, and I thought to myself, you wouldn't like this because I thought it would be too slow.
no, no, I liked it. I like the sequel. I love the reboot. I mean, man.
Yeah, I like
I
it
mean,
too,
I mean,
guys.
I'm. I mean, when we talk about the reboot, we'll have to do some comparisons.
Yeah, it's a great
There's
movie. I think it's a lot of fun. Is it extreme? Maybe at places, but I think the staying power to it is obviously not because of the teenagers who normally you think would be the character you associate with most, especially at that age. When I saw this, because it had a little bit of a sexy adult thing to it, I was more intrigued about that element, and I think it delivers with the adult themes to it. It's not particularly gory, it's not particularly graphic, certainly not by 80 standards. It's not overly cheesy, I don't think, and I think it's a movie definitely worth watching. It holds up well on a rewatch. So yes, if you haven't seen it, go see it. And if you need something to see, go see it again. If you're lamenting the crap that's out there today, go see it again. But not until you've tweeted this out and you said, "Hey,
yeah,
listen to the
yeah,
Money Extreme Movie Show."
yeah. The main thing I liked about this movie is the fact is it's a nod to Vincent Price.
Yes, yes. Well, Dalton, because you're here, instead of me saying "Stay extreme," I'm going to follow the doctor's lead in our sign off. So, doctor, go ahead.
Well, as always, stay extreme
Stay
and
extreme.
toodles.
Toodles. Adios. Au revoir.
Arrivederci.
Good night, everybody. Take care. Look for a link soon to be posted for our top 10 of 2011 coming up shortly with Englentine. That'll be interesting. Good night, everybody.